Welcome to Weathered Questions, where we answer the questions on your radar.
Welcome in, everybody, to our third episode here of Weathered Questions. My name is meteorologist Kaj O'Mara, joined by meteorologist Jan Kaj. Jan, how's summer so far?
We are off fast and furious here into summer, but it's been great so far, Kaj. Keeping busy with lots of projects and plenty of time outdoors in the sunshine, enjoying whatever weather we have around Iowa, because it's always a little bit different. What about you?
It is. Lots of variety. So continuing on with some home projects here. The garden's doing great. My daughter and I, we just had a couple of strawberries pop up. And I'll tell you what, it's the homegrown strawberries, because she grabbed it and showed it to me, and I should have taken a picture of it. That thing tasted
instead
like
you probably
a fruit
ate it,
snack.
right?
Yep. Oh, yeah. We ate it right away. It tasted like a fruit snack, though. I could not believe it. It was so sweet, so great. And to have it already this soon, you know, we're thrilled. We're trying a new experiment in the backyard with a couple of different planters this year. So the weather's been pretty conducive. It has not been overly hot yet, but we'll see. That may be changing in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I've got a couple plants going in the garden as well, and it's been fun to be able to watch those. And the spring so far has been very nice. So as we head into summer here, I'm sure we'll be getting, all that warm weather and even more of those things starting to pop up, which takes us into our first question for the week. As we approach that summertime, what is the difference between humidity, dew point, and relative humidity? Terms that we use as meteorologists a lot this time of year, and we'll start using more and more and more as we head deeper into summer. So Kaj, help us out. What's the difference between those three?
I think this is also a good time to remind the audience, this is not a technical lecture. This is not a deposition. This is not an expert paper by any stretch. And so we're going to keep things very, very simple here. But you've got these different terms that we toss around, and especially in a television broadcast or on a weather app, you're going to see pretty much two of them. Humidity is more of a specific type of number. And so that's a general number that we can derive actually through a bunch of math. That right now we're going to just kind of throw off to the side. And we're going to go between dew point and relative humidity, because those are two terms that we see a lot in our everyday life. So the higher the dew point number, essentially the more moisture there is in the atmosphere. If it's in the 60s, it feels a little bit sticky. If it's in the 70s, it feels really quite sticky, almost a tropical style of air mass. And then once the dew points hit 80 and higher, the atmosphere almost explodes with thunderstorms at that point. And that's really just an absolute measure of moisture in our atmosphere. Here's the difference. It might come to a surprise to you that if we put the word relative in front of anything, then it just becomes a value that's compared against one another. So for example, Jan, I just had dinner. I'm not hungry relative to dinner, but I could eat again.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing about relative humidity and dew point is the dew point's really going to tell you a lot about the moisture content and the feel factor of our atmosphere, whereas the relative humidity on a 0 degree January morning with a 0 degree dew point, that atmosphere is actually saturated, except it can't hold anymore. And so that's actually relatively 100% saturated. So it can be a bit of a confusing value. But one thing that I try and think about when I try and explain this, especially to school kids and ones that kind of get into that, grade 5, 6, 7, 8, starting to experiment a little bit more with their parents in the kitchen, maybe using measuring cups a little bit more. If you have a 1 cup measuring cup and you put a half cup of water in it, you're what? Half full. You're 50% full. And it's a half a cup of water. What if you've got a 2 cup Pyrex and you put 1 cup of water in there? Relatively, it's still 50%. It's still half full. And that half can be thought of as, okay, yeah, you're right, it's 50%. But in absolute measure, it's actually a cup of water. You've actually doubled your water. So relative humidity is always relative. When somebody yells out and says, it's 99% humidity and it's 95, No, it's not. You'd be dead. You would be at a level of sweat you have never been at before. So that's kind of my whole thoughts on these terms, Jan, just kind of in a really simple form.
Yeah, kind of it in a nutshell. And I think I speak for many meteorologists, at least, when I say that we kind of prefer that dew point number because of the relative nature of relative humidity. That dew point is going to tell you, regardless of the time of year, regardless of what's going on, it's going to indicate for you exactly where you're at and how much moisture is in the air and how hot and sticky and uncomfortable it really feels outside, or maybe it's not uncomfortable at all, again, depending on if it's that warm or what time of year it is. But generally we use dew point. A lot of sources, maybe weather apps and things like that, will tend to use relative humidity, and so that's the one that people might think they're more familiar with, but it's just harder to get a real usable indication or a usable parameter out of that relative humidity number.
I agree. It's all about practicality. And so relative humidity changes so much every single day. Dew point doesn't. And it gives you a really good base level at what you're looking at. And the dew point isn't oftentimes forecast an hourly forecast for whatever reason. So if you're able to find some sort of information source that does do hourly dew point, that might benefit you, especially if you're one that maybe relies on evaporation. Maybe you're one that paints for a living, and you're always looking at those numbers, trying to figure out what your day looks like. A painter, for example, might use relative humidity much more to make sure that he or she knows when the paint is going to be able to dry in its best. Whereas somebody else like us may use dew points because, in addition to how it feels, that's storm ingredients too, and that kind of gets us into a whole new avenue with a whole different question that I'm sure we're probably going to get here on Weathered Questions here someday.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one last thing to help make that number usable. Again, that dew point, it's always going to be below your temperature. So that the closer it gets to that temperature number, let's say it's 59 degrees right now. Well, if your dew point is 59, it should be raining outside. And if your dew point is, in the lower 50s or further down, then maybe we're approaching that, or that it's super humid or something like that. But the closer that number is, if the temperature is 59 and your dew point's at 56, 57, 58, then it feels very, very humid outside and starting to get to that uncomfortable or humid nature. And again, the higher the temperature and dew point, then even more humid and soupy the air is going to feel.
You got it. And that's a great start to Weathered Questions here this week. And for the first time, so this is our third episode together here, Jan, we now have an out-of-state question for us to discuss, which is super exciting.
Woohoo!
Very exciting.
It
so
is.
This question
we're making
comes from
gains.
Sean, out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And the question reads, what is the effect of smoke on our weather pattern? And earlier in June, we saw a lot of this going on in the upper Midwest. So, Jan, the effects of smoke on our weather pattern, what do you think? How can you help out Sean from Minneapolis?
Yeah, well, great question. And interesting that it comes from Minnesota, because a lot of that smoke earlier this month was coming from the Canadian wildfires. So, we had it down here in Iowa, across a lot of the Midwest, and, well over into the East Coast even. So that smoke can travel a very long way. It can have those impacts of making the sky very hazy, that milky appearance. And sometimes you can even smell it down at the surface. But when it comes to actually affecting the weather pattern and changing the weather, it really doesn't have that much of an effect. You would have to have a lot of smoke and some other kind of things going on in the atmosphere for anything to really affect much. Maybe if you had some very, very thick smoke, you could start to see some ripple effects. But in general, very rarely, or if ever, does it really truly affect our weather pattern. It's just going to kind of, an otherwise sunny day is going to look like it's maybe a little bit on the cloudy side, even though there's no clouds there. It's just that layer of smoke overhead. Again, sometimes if you have a little bit of extra turbulence in the atmosphere, maybe some different fronts or storms or something moving through that's going to help kind of move that air around and help that smoke drop down nearer to the surface, then we're going to get things like air quality warnings, air quality alerts. But again, that's not actually impacting the weather itself. It's just a danger with the amount of particulates in the atmosphere closer to the ground where people are breathing, that if you have any particularly sensitive conditions like asthma or a heart condition or something like that, that you shouldn't be breathing in those extra particulates, that you should have a heightened awareness. But as far as just basic weather pattern, there's not a lot of effects. Kai, do you have anything to add to that?
Not so much. No, I think you nailed it. It's just too small of a phenomenon to have a large scale effect. It's not going to steer a low pressure system away. It's not going to strengthen a high. It may lower your daytime highs by 3 or 4 degrees, depending on the thickness of it, but that's not necessarily a pattern change. And then the other part about it is some have asked, well, what's the smell like if it does get down to the ground? Well, it obviously depends on what's on fire. But a lot of times, because it's a wood type fire, it almost smells like you'll get a quick whiff of a campfire, like somebody's got a campfire around here. But in reality, it's actually partly sunny where you are. And to your point, just a little bit of that smoke managed to mix down to the ground, maybe in a wind gust or sometimes even a light shower. But that's what I think the biggest thing about smoke is you just get a little hint of it. If you're sensitive to those particulates, watch that. And then really incredible sunrises and sunsets. You can see the whole disk of the sun. Typically, it's very deep red, especially the sunsets when we have smoke like that.
Yeah, if you remember, a couple weeks back, we've talked about those colors in the sky and how different particles will kind of scatter them out. So it is all those extra little smoke particles, little particulates in the sky that are going to make the sky or that sunrise turn extra red or extra orange, which I would say is a perfect segue into our trivia question here as we're about halfway through the show. So let's keep on that sunshine topic. We want to know if you know in what month the UV index is the highest. So you've probably heard of the UV index and know that that's why you're putting your sunscreen on. So in what month is the UV index the highest? Do you think it's May, June, or July? We'll send it to break here, give you a few seconds to think about that, and we'll be back in just a bit.
Picture this, a kitchen that's more than just a place to cook. Custom cabinets, striking countertops, and a design that's as functional as it is beautiful. Now, imagine a master bathroom that's pure luxury. A deep soaking tub, a sleek shower, and a style that feels like a 5-star resort. At Hometown Restyling, big dreams become reality, and it's easier than ever with 0% financing for 60 months. Go to hometownrestyling.com for a free quote.
Today's trivia question.
All right, welcome back. We are ready to talk about the answer to that trivia question. One more reminder, in what month is the UV index the highest? Do you think it's May, June, or July? And the answer is June. So if you got kind of tricked by that one, if you thought maybe it was July, because that's when we tend to have those warmer months. Obviously, we're talking about the northern hemisphere here. It's actually June when it's the highest, because think about when the summer solstice is, or the first day of summer, as many people will know it. That's going to be in June, around the 20th, the 21st. This year, it's late on the 20th. So that is when you're going to have the highest UV index. It doesn't matter that we get those warmer temperatures generally slightly after the solstice and after that peak in heat UV index rating. The UV index is going to be highest when that sun angle is the highest, and that happens in June.
Yeah, it's just like a flashlight. That's all the UV is how much ultraviolet radiation is coming down into me. On a cloudy day, it gets blocked out, right? But then on non-cloudy days, it's just simply a function of where is the sun and how much of its rays get down to me. And we start to see a sharp increase in the spring months. And I think what catches a lot of us off guard, usually in March or April, We get out there for the first time since winter, and we might be in our short sleeves, and all of a sudden our forearms get burned in 10 or 15 minutes because we haven't been out there all year. Well, what happens is it's a function of the height of the sun in the sky. How direct are those rays? And June, whether it's a 60-degree day with no clouds in the sky, I will say it's pretty rare in most parts of the area, but it's sneaky because it's the same thing. If you go up to northern Minnesota and it's 65 and fully sunny in June, you can absolutely fry. You can absolutely fry because the UV is so high. I think a lot of times we associate high sunburn risk with hotter temperatures because we're simply wearing less clothing.
Yeah,
now,
we're more exposed to the sun rays at that point.
Correct, because if we're out there in April and it's a 45-degree day, even late April, the UV can be pretty high. If we're out in jeans, a hooded sweatshirt, and maybe even a stocking cap, depending on, how cold it is, or in my case, how much hair you got left, you don't want the top of your head burning, right? All of a sudden, your skin exposure went way down. You've got bare hands and you've got the back of your neck and your face, basically.
Yeah.
But if you have a heat wave in April, now you're out there in a t-shirt and shorts and your skin exposure is probably 10 to 20x what it was. And so as a result, more skin gets exposed, more UV comes in, and a higher burn chance. So it's all about the sun angle. It's not about the temperature. So hopefully you learned something today about that, but we are in peak UV season right now, Jan. So sunscreen definitely key, and keeping those eyes and ears protected, especially. Gosh, you don't want to forget the ears. That hurts so bad if you forget your ears.
Oh yeah, I just have to sometimes I'll even put zinc oxide on my nose just protect the nose and ears.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's also June is usually a pretty active severe weather month too. So now that we've moved past our trivia question here for this third episode of Weathered Questions, we're going to get to our final question here of the day. And this question really is quite simple, but can get quite complicated. We're going to keep it on the simple side, Jan. I think that's the best way to approach this. Why don't the tornado sirens always go off?
Ooh. Yeah, another great one. So the first bit I'm going to tackle there is they're not tornado sirens. So many people call them tornado sirens because that is when we hear them a lot, but they are actually called outdoor warning sirens. And their entire purpose is to alert people that are outside that dangerous weather is happening or approaching. And so that might mean that they go off for high wind in your county or your town or your municipality. We always encourage people to check with their city, with their county officials, and understand what are the reasons that they go off in my area, so that regardless though, if they're going off, you should probably seek safe shelter and then seek that additional information and try to figure out what's going on, but don't do it in the other order because then you might be wasting precious time. Now, why don't they always go off? Well, they are a manually operated system. A lot of times, the either first responders, emergency management, there's kind of a team of people that will be in charge of operating those. And when the National Weather Service issues certain warnings with specific tags, like, again, maybe that 70 mile per hour wind tag, or maybe it is that tornado tag or something that is attached to that warning that tells people that are in charge of those, hey, it's time to set them off. That's usually what happens. But everything, isn't always perfect. And sometimes something that is manual will have malfunctions. So maybe they won't always go off. Or on the flip side, maybe you didn't hear them. Just because you hear them sometimes doesn't mean you're always going to hear them. Because back to where I started this, remember, they're outdoor warning sirens. They are not designed to be heard by people that are inside. So maybe you won't hear them in your home or in your place of work. Even if you can, sometimes different environmental factors will mean that that sound will travel differently. So ultimately, don't rely on those to be your first line of defense. Never rely on those to be your first line of defense. They are kind of a backup method. And we have other ways, other amazing ways. We have such great technology these days that you should be relying on. Make sure you have a reliable weather app. Make sure you have weather radio. Make sure you have multiple reliable ways to get that severe weather information. If I had $1 for every time I have said multiple reliable ways to get severe weather information, I would be very rich, because that is
We'd
something
be
that
retired,
we preach.
Jan.
We would be. We'd be on a beach somewhere, not worried about tornadoes at all.
With sunscreen on, of course.
Yeah, exactly. but no, that's it. Ultimately, it's very important that you have that, and that those outdoor warning sirens do serve a very important purpose for, kids out biking and at the park and those who aren't paying attention to the weather. But if you know that there's a potential for severe weather, that should help you know to stay weather aware that day and not only be relying on those outdoor warning sirens.
I think you brought up a good point, and then we'll close this topic. The outdoor warning siren system, it does vary per county. It does. And it's not similar by state either. So it's really one of those things that as a citizen of your community, you need to seek out with your local emergency management office why they blow their sirens and in what situations they do that, because not every county is the same. If a line of storms crosses the state, let's just take Iowa as an example, there's different criteria for every county that those storms go through. And it's a possibility that one of your family members 3 counties over may not get a siren, and you do get a siren, yet it's the exact same storm. So it's one of those things. It's a county by county jurisdiction in many locations. And so that's something to just look at if you're a citizen of a town or a county.
Absolutely. All right, let's tackle one more topic before we close today. The ultimate question, and I think, Kai, you and I both got asked this week. What is your favorite weather app? And
that's a great question.
Yeah, we got asked this. I got asked this by Lori in Des Moines. You got asked this by Nikki in Cedar Rapids. It's definitely on people's mind. We've been asked that several times before. Ultimately, it depends. Kind of like back to the conversation we had last week. It depends what you're looking for out of it, right? But my ultimate answer that I usually give is get one that is local to you and that has a person helping operate it in some way. That's not just straight model data, because so many of those automatic apps that you get on your phone are going to have straight model data. And that means every hour that information is probably going to change a little bit. And it may be for the better. It may not be. But so many people say, well, why are you wrong all the time? Why are you wrong all the time? Well, is it me as a meteorologist, or are you looking at something that isn't actually driven by a meteorologist? So that's my go-to answer. Kai, how do you usually answer that one?
I would say, much to what you just said, what do you need it for? If you need it for general observation, if you're almost using it in place of a weather station, I would then very much say get some local app where you've got a person that's probably inserted themselves into the app. It might be a recorded video from a local television station. That can be a great way to just kind of keep engaged with the weather. Maybe it's a situation, though, where you're trying to time out rainfall. And in that case, if that's your only use for it, maybe the model updates that are frequent are for you. The question that was specifically posed to me was, what app has the best lightning layer? And I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I can tell you that I do have an app that has lightning on it. I personally use RadarScope, and I pay about $10 a year for that lightning layer. And one of the reasons I do that is because of officiating soccer, knowing where our lightning is, and I know the source of it. It should be from the National Lightning Detection Network. And any app that's got lightning on it, I hope will show you that source. There might be a little lowercase I that you can tap on so you at least know where the lightning is coming from. Otherwise, I don't know exactly where it's coming from. But that's one of the things with outdoor sports in the summer, especially if you're a baseball parent, softball parent, anybody who does road construction, I think lightning is really critical for that kind of stuff. And so you might just experiment with some apps that are out there and see what works for you. And the cool part about these apps, Jan, is you can just go where the weather is. So if we've got a huge storm that's blasting through Dallas, Texas, just take the app, move it down there and analyze the lightning a little bit and see what you like. And if you don't like it, fine, delete the app. I think it's just that simple. So it's kind of a trial and error, I think, for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it really is. You spoke to RadarScope there. I use that one as well for tracking rainfall. It has excellent radar data. Obviously, there are some caveats to it. It's paid if you want the extra layers and stuff like that. But for us as meteorologists, for us, interested in the weather, we definitely use that. And there's several other apps that we could get into, but if you have any more specific questions, maybe that you want us to dive into on why we might prefer one, please feel free to submit those and we'd be happy to tackle those. Now we're winding down on time for this week. So we want to remind you that if you have a question for us, drop us a quick email, weatheredquestions, WEATHRED questions @gmail.com. We'd be happy to answer those for you here in future episodes. For now though, thanks for joining us. Stay safe.